What's up guys, Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video we're going to check out the newest version of SketchUp that just rolled out, version 2023.1. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. And so if you visit blog.sketchup.com, there's a new post on there that talks you through the changes contained in this newest version. So I'll link to this in the notes down below, but in version 2023.1, there's been a couple notable changes. So the change that most people are going to notice, it's definitely the biggest, is they've gone through and they've changed and updated the icons in SketchUp and Layout in order to more closely match up with the SketchUp for web and iPad versions. And so the reason for this change is they're changing all of their icons and everything so that everything looks kind of standard in style across the free online version, the iPad version, and the desktop version. Now note that this just changed the way that the icons look. It did not necessarily change the function of any of these objects. So just note that these are now going to have this kind of like blue color scheme with like red dots and red highlights. Now that is going to look a little bit different. And so one thing, at least for me, that stands out is the icons that are on the screen when you're using tools like the move tool feel like they've gotten bigger than the 2022 version, right? Here's the 2022 version. If I jump into the move tool, right, the little icon is a lot smaller. So it doesn't feel like it takes up as much space on the screen. So that's one thing for me that I'm not a massive fan of. The bigger pointer and the bigger move tool just make it feel a little bit less precise to me. That's probably personal opinion. I'd love to hear from you about what you think about that. But just note that with the change in icons that are over here, you're also going to see a change in your cursor right here and the size of the tools that you pop up. I would like to see an option to make those a little bit smaller on the page at some point, but for now that is a change that has been made. Now one thing to note is that the icons in Layout have been changed as well, right? So now these look kind of the same as the icons in the SketchUp version over here. So they've all been changed to this kind of like blue, light blue with a little bit of red highlight scheme inside of SketchUp. All right, so next up, we've got a new function that allows you to create custom snaps on your object, actually called snaps. All right, and so snaps are interesting to me. They're very similar to an extension I covered a long time ago called the Snap Connector extension, but basically what they do is they allow you to double click into an object, right click, and then click on Make or Edit Snaps. So when you do that, this is basically going to allow you to set custom snap points with custom orientations, right? So I can click and I can place the snap point right here, right? So I'm going to take this, click along here. And so with things like this pipe, and I accidentally placed one over here, note that you can use the eraser tool to erase out snaps if you want to do that. But I'm going to do the same thing with this pipe connector right here. And I might, in this case, actually draw along this edge just a little bit so that I can set this to kind of like the bottom of the pipe right here. But now if I come in here, right click, and I do a Make Edit Snaps, and I find that point, right? So there's that point right there. I can orient it. Whoops, I set that on the wrong line. So we'll set this along this line right here. So see how that's oriented along that line? Well, now with these snap points, I can actually use the move tool and orient this right here. So from a placing objects standpoint, if you're doing things like piping or other things like that, this is actually really functional. So it's something that I actually really like. So say that we were to create another snap right here on this object, and I'm just going to place it on the end for simplicity's sake. But say that we were to place another snap right here, I could take this object, put it on that snap point, and they're going to align right here. So I actually like this snaps functionality. We may look into this a little bit more in the future. You can move in here with objects like this and you can adjust them after the fact. So if I double click in here, right click, and I do a Make or Edit Snaps, I can come in here and I can click on that snap and move it around in order to reset it. So if I want to reset the snaps like this, I can do that just by right clicking in there. So that is an interesting function to me. I think we're going to find some good applications for that. I'm pretty happy about the snaps functionality. All right, so the flip tool now has the ability to set a custom mirror plane based on your object. So say I select this object right here and I want to mirror it. right, I can come in here and remember how before you had the different axes based on the local or the global, right? So you could either tap the Alt key to adjust to the local, or you could stay with the global. Well, now you can mouse over a surface like this one. It's going to give you the option to add a custom flip plane, right? So now if I come in here and I want to place that plane based on this angle right here, I can do that, and I can flip based on that custom flip plane. You can also tap the control key, by the way, and go into copy mode. Now, one thing to note about this is it seems like once you set the custom flip plane, if you want to set another one, what you need to do is you need to just drop out of the tool and then jump back in again. So for example, if I wanted to create a mirror here, I would just come in here, tap the control key, and create that mirror like this. So you can create that custom flip plane just by mousing over a surface in SketchUp, which is really helpful for these non-rectangular shapes like this table. All right, so next up, we've got a function that you can find inside of your styles. So if you go into your styles, then go to edit, under your background settings right here, notice how there's a new box in here for horizon. What that's going to do is that's going to let you set a horizon that's now kind of a gradient, right? So now if I click on OK, what this is going to do is this is going to gently transition that gradient color to the color you have selected for your sky. So let's say I pick something really dark for my sky like this. Notice what it's going to do is it's going to give you the gradient from the color that you pick right here, which can be whatever you want, right? I could make that whiter if I wanted to, whatever. But then it's going to give you kind of a gradient background like this. This actually does do some interesting things with your horizon. It does allow you to be a little bit more artistic without having to jump over into a rendering engine or anything like that. So I can definitely see places where you would use this horizon gradient background function in SketchUp. All right, so next up, we've got an improvement to the Lasso select tool. And if you've worked with like Photoshop or something like this, I do think this is going to make this tool a little bit more familiar feeling to you. So if you remember the Lasso select tool up till now, you kind of had to click and drag in order to select. So if I jump back into SketchUp 2022, for example, and I'm going to go ahead and close all of these extra windows, but previously the way that it worked is you had to kind of like click and drag like this, right? It was the only way that you could really add a lasso. So now instead of just having the option to click and drag, you can also click and set points using a polygonal lasso like this one. So what that's going to do is that's going to let you come in here and be more precise with your selections. And so one thing to note about this that's a little bit weird is if I come in here and I click on a face, right? Notice how it's not placing that initial point of my lasso. So for whatever reason, you have to select an object first. So something that you want in your selection, then you can click and move your mouse in order to do this selection right here. I don't know if that's an intended function or not, but just be aware that you are going to have to click once to select something and then click again to place this and start placing points when you're working with raw geometry. Now, I don't have that issue if I click off of the object and then I click onto the object right here. So I'm not really sure if that's the way that's intended to work or not, but just know that if you are having trouble getting it to start drawing that, you can just select first, click again, and then it's going to allow you to start setting points in your polyline select. But as someone who uses a fair amount of Photoshop and programs that use or that have a select tool like this, I do think this is definitely a good function and it is going to make selecting things easier. So there have also been a couple changes to layout. I've not been able to test these in any kind of like deep manner or anything like that. The first is if you go to your file, document setup, there's a function now called rendering. And what rendering is going to do is it's going to allow you to set your display resolution versus your output resolution. And so what that means is that means that you're able to basically override what you see in your viewport right here. So you can set your viewport to a low display resolution. This is a lot like the way that you can do it in Revit, I think. So you can set this to a low display resolution, but then you can set your output to the high. So if you're having performance issues, this gives you an option for giving you the ability to work in kind of that lower resolution manner. And then notice how if you were to change it to high, then things are going to look a little bit different right here. And so we're gonna go back to low. I don't know how that works practically with the output override. I'm not sure exactly how that works, if that overrides the rendering styles you have over here in your model. I'm not sure about that one. So if you do run into any issues with this, you may just untoggle the output override if it doesn't do what you want it to do. All right, and then next up, this one I'm not 100% sure I'm fully understanding. I think what they're telling you with the auto associate labels is that this is actually going through and it's linking to things like your scene name and your scale. So there's like named values in some of these scrapbooks items right here. If I go in and do that in layout, for example, like if I go to the elegant title block and I drag this in, notice how what this is doing is this is linking back to my scene right here, and then it's pulling my scene 1 name, which is the name of the scene that I'm bringing in from SketchUp. So it's pulling in that scene name, and so that might trigger a change in the way that you name your scenes over in SketchUp, because traditionally I hadn't actually been naming these scenes with like a detail name or anything like that, so I would have to be a little bit more specific with that, but it does now have those named values in here. Now it gets a little bit weird for me because like things like the scale are sometimes pulling and sometimes not. So if I jump into the simple serif, for example, and I click and drag this in, notice how this is set up and it's pulling a value of scene description, but there's no such thing as scene description, right? Like if I double click in this one, it's scene name. So what this should be is this should be scene name, not scene description. So if I change that, and then click in here, now it's pulling that. Now from a scale standpoint, it's not actually pulling the scale in here. So I think, let me see. So if I go into maybe like contemporary and I try this again. So if I drag this in here, now the scale is working, but this is set to be scene description again. So right here, this is pulling scale and it's working. This one is pulling scale and it's not. And I'm not sure why. Maybe because there's a space in here. But for whatever reason, some of these are not actually pulling the scale in here. So there are named values in the scrapbooks, but they seem to be hit or miss unless I'm just doing something wrong in here. So if anybody has a little bit more knowledge about what's going on with those, feel free to leave a comment in the notes down below. All right, so leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought about this new version. Personally, out of all of the features, I think the snaps feature is probably going to be the one that's the most helpful, but I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. What do you think about this new version? So if you do want to learn more about how to use SketchUp, my course is currently on sale through the end of the week, so I'll link to that on this page. But as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.